Good morning, afternoon and evening everyone. I am Brenna Victoria, and today is the sixth and last episode, the of American Mafia, the Genovese crime family. Now all of these videos had a lot of the same people, and I mean a lot, and that's only because some of these members had once ran together in the same circles. Now, grab your tea or coffee, blanket, hit those lights and cozy up to watch this final episode. As always, the family is one of the 5 families that dominates organized crime activities in New York City and New Jersey as part of the American Mafia. They maintain a varying degrees of influence over many of the smaller mob families outside of the New York area. These families include the Philadelphia crime family, the Patriarca crime family, and the Buffalo crime family. The current family was founded by Charles Lucky Luciano, and was known as the Luciano crime family from 1931 to 1957, when it was renamed after boss Vito Genovese. Originally in control of the waterfront on the west side of Manhattan and the Fulton Fish Market, the family was run for years by the Oddfather, Vincent the Chin Giganti, who feigned insanity by shuffling unshaven through New York's Greenwich Village wearing a tattered bath robe and muttering to himself incoherently, to avoid prosecution. The Genovese family is the oldest and the largest of the 5 families. As of 2020, no more news of the Genovese family. The family originated from the old Morello gang of East Harlem, the first mafia family in New York City. Giuseppe Morello arrived in New York from the village of Corleone, Sicily, Italy, in 1892. His half-brothers Nicholas, Vincenzo, Ciro and the rest of his family followed the next year. The Morello brothers' bond was now incredible strong. They ended up forming the 107th Street Mob and taking on the Italian neighborhood of East Harlem, parts of Manhattan and the Bronx. They were an unstoppable force to be reckoned with. Ignazio the Wolf Lupo became Giuseppe Morello's strongest allies. Just the mention of Lupo's name was enough for people to go quiet. No one wanted the mobster who controlled Manhattan's Little Italy to off them, but they did grow to respect him. Lupo became the brothers-in-law when their sister married Lupo, and with that both gangs were united as one. It prospered well into 1903, when the group began looking into starting a counterfeiting ring with powerful Sicilian mafioso, Vito Ferro. Now within this ring, they started printing $5 bills in Sicily, and importing them illegally here into the U.S. It was long until New York PD got word of something going down, that they appointed their best detective, Joseph Pestrosino, to start investigating the gang's counterfeiting operation, the barrel murders, and the Black Hand extortion letters. In 1909, on November 15, news spread that Morello, Lupo and many others were arrested on the charges of counterfeiting. Morello and Lupo were sentenced to a combined 55 years in prison, Morello to 25, and Lupo to 30. As the Morello family increased in power and influence, bloody territorial conflicts arose with other Italian criminal gangs in New York. The Morellos had an alliance with Giosuè Gallucci, a prominent East Harlem businessman and Camorrista with local political connections. On May 17, 1915, Gallucci was murdered in a power struggle between the Morellos and the Neapolitan Camorra organization, which consisted of 2 Brooklyn gangs run by Pellegrino Morano and Alessandro Valero. The fight over Gallucci's rackets became known as the Mafia Camorra War. After months of fighting, Morano offered a truce. A meeting was arranged at a Navy Street cafe owned by Valero. On September 7, 1916, Nicholas Morello and his bodyguard Charles Ubriaco were ambushed and killed upon arrival by 5 members of the Camorra gang. In 1917, Morano was charged with Morello's murder after Camorrista Ralph Daniello implicated him in the murder. By 1918, law enforcement had sent many Camorra gang members to prison, decimating the Camorra in New York and ending the war. Many of the remaining Camorra members joined the Morello family. Although many of the remaining Camorra members had joined the family, there were still others who made themselves very strong rivals compared to the Camorra. In 1920, prohibition was passed. No alcohol sales meant the family had to find another way to make a living, so they regrouped and built the lucrative bootlegging operation in New York, and the hit contracts of Morello and Lupo were ordered by none other than mafia boss Salvatore D'Aquila, once he got word that both were released from prison. This is when Giuseppe Joe Masseria and Rocco Valenti began to fight for control of the Morello family. On December 29, 1920, Masseria's men murdered Valenti's ally, Salvatore Moro. Then, on May 8, 1922, the Valenti gang murdered Vincenzo Terranova. Masseria's gang retaliated, killing Morello member Silva Tagliagamba. On August 11, 1922, Masseria's men murdered Valenti, ending the conflict. Masseria won and took over the Morello family. In the mid-1920s, the businesses of bootlegging, extortion, loan sharking and illegal gambling rackets began to expand throughout New York, and it was the work of Masseria to make sure that the rackets would be well protected. Masseria recruited so many young and ambitious mobsters. These mobsters also included Charles Lucky Luciano, Frank Costello, Joseph Joey Adonis, Vito Genovese and Albert Anastasia. Due to how well Luciano did his job, he was promoted to being a top aide of Masseria's criminal organization. But no one knew that the end of the 1920s would be ending with a bang. Enter Salvatore Maranzano, the rival boss and main enemy of Masseria himself. Maranzano had come from Sicily to run the Castellamarese clan. But the intense rivalry between Masseria and Maranzano would culminate into becoming what is now known as the bloody Castellamarese War. Masseria would end up dying on April 15, 1931, at his favorite restaurant known as Nuova Villa Tamaro, on Coney Island. Masseria was playing cards when he decided that he needed the bathroom, so he excused himself, but in walked the gunmen. His death was ordered by Maranzano himself, with the gunmen being Anastasia, Genovese, Adonis and Bugsy Siegel. The getaway driver was the Artichoke King or Ciro Terranova, but even that lazy bum couldn't do his job either. Rumor has it that after the shooting, he froze in his sit, causing Siegel to push him over and drive. With Masseria dead, Luciano became boss of Masseria's gang, as well as lieutenant to Maranzano, thus ending the Castellamarese War. By September 1931, Maranzano was considered the boss of all bosses, but soon became suspicious of Luciano. Maranzano wanted Luciano gone, so he hired Irish gangster Vincent Mad Dog Call to do the job. But before anything could go down, Luciano had gotten word that he was marked for death. On the 10th of September, Luciano, Genovese and Costello were ordered to report to Maranzano's office on 230 Park Avenue in Manhattan. Since Luciano knew what about to happen, he sent some very unknown gangsters to Maranzano and his people. The gangsters were able to disarm the bodyguards, while the other gangsters found and shot Maranzano multiple times. This murder would go down in history as the fabled Night of the Sicilian Vespers. After Maranzano's murder, Luciano called a meeting in Chicago with various bosses where he proposed a commission to serve as the governing body for organized crime. Designed to settle all disputes and decide which families controlled which territories, the commission has been called Luciano's greatest innovation. Luciano's goals with the commission were to quietly maintain his own power over all the families and to prevent future gang wars. The bosses approved the idea of the commission. The group's first test came in 1935, when it ordered Dutch Schultz to drop his plans to murder Special Prosecutor Thomas E. Dewey. Luciano argued that a Dewey assassination would precipitate a massive law enforcement crackdown. An enraged Schultz said he would kill Dewey anyway, and walked out of the meeting. Murder Inc. leader Albert Anastasia approached Luciano with information that Schultz had asked him to stake out Dewey's apartment building on 5th Avenue. Upon hearing the news, the commission held a discreet meeting to discuss the matter. After 6 hours of deliberations, the commission ordered Lepp Buchalter to eliminate Schultz. On October 23, 1935, before he could kill Dewey, Schultz was shot in a tavern in Newark, New Jersey, and succumbed to his injuries the following day. Luciano influenced Democratic Party politics in New York at the time, giving direction to Tammany Hall Associates. On May 13, 1936, Luciano's pandering trial began. Dewey prosecuted the case that Carter built against Luciano. He accused Luciano of being part of a massive prostitution ring known as the Combination. During the trial, Dewey exposed Luciano for lying on the witness stand through direct quizzing and records of telephone calls. Luciano also had no explanation for why his federal income tax records claimed he made only $22,000 a year, while he was obviously a wealthy man. On June 7, 1936, Luciano was convicted on 62 counts of compulsory prostitution. On June 18, he was sentenced to 30 to 50 years in state prison, along with Botillo and others. Luciano continued to run his crime family from prison, relaying his orders through acting boss Vito Genovese, but in 1937, Genovese fled to Naples to avoid an impending murder indictment in New York. Luciano appointed his consigliere, Frank Costello, as the new acting boss and the overseer of Luciano's interests. During World War II, federal agents asked Luciano for help in preventing enemy sabotage on the New York waterfront and other activities. Luciano agreed to help, but in reality provided insignificant assistance to the Allied cause. After the end of the war, the arrangement with Luciano became public knowledge. To prevent further embarrassment, the government agreed to deport Luciano on condition that he never returned to the U.S. In 1946, Luciano was taken from prison and deported to Italy. Costello ruled for 20 peaceful years, but his quiet reign ended when Genovese was extradited from Italy to New York. During his absence, Costello demoted Genovese from underboss to caporegime, leaving Genovese determined to take control of the family. Soon after his arrival in the U.S., Genovese was acquitted of the 1936 murder charge that had driven him into exile. Free of legal entanglements, he started plotting against Costello with the assistance of Mangano family underboss Carlo Gambino. On May 2, 1957, Luciano mobster Vincent Giganti shot Costello in the side of the head on a public street. However, Costello survived the attack. Months later, Mangano boss Albert Anastasia, a powerful ally of Costello's, was murdered by Gambino's gunmen. With Anastasia's death, Gambino seized control of the Mangano family. Feeling afraid and isolated after the shootings, Costello quietly retired and surrendered control of the Luciano family to Genovese. Having taken control of what was renamed the Genovese crime family in 1957, Genovese decided to organize a Cosa Nostra conference to legitimize his new position. Held at mobster Joseph Barbera's estate in Appalachian, New York, the Appalachian meeting attracted over 100 Cosa Nostra mobsters from around the nation. However, local law enforcement discovered the meeting and quickly surrounded the estate. As the meeting broke up, the police stopped a car driven by Russell Bufalino, whose passengers included Genovese and 3 other men, at a roadblock as they left the estate. Cosa Nostra leaders were chagrined by the public exposure and bad publicity from the Appalachian meeting, and generally blamed Genovese for the fiasco. All those apprehended were fined, up to $10,000 each, and given prison sentences, ranging from 3 to 5 years, but all the convictions were overturned on appeal in 1960. Wary of Genovese gaining more power in the commission, Gambino used the Appalachian meeting as an excuse to move against his former ally. Gambino, Luciano, Costello, and Lucchese allegedly lured Genovese into a drug-dealing scheme that ultimately resulted in his conspiracy indictment and conviction. In 1959, Genovese was sentenced to 15 years in prison on narcotics charges. Genovese, who was the most powerful boss in New York, had been effectively eliminated as a rival by Gambino. After Genovese was sent to prison, in 1959, the family leadership secretly established a ruling panel to run the family in his absence. This first panel included acting boss Thomas Tommy Ryan Eboli, underboss Gerardo Jerry Catena, and Catena's protege, Philip Benny Squint Lombardo. After Genovese died in 1969, Lombardo was named his successor. However, the family appointed a series of front bosses to masquerade as the official family boss. The aim of these deceptions was to protect Lombardo by confusing law enforcement about who was the true leader of the family. In the late 1960s, Gambino lent $4 million to Eboli for a drug scheme in an attempt to gain control of the Genovese family. When Eboli failed to pay back his debt, Gambino, with commission approval, murdered Eboli in 1972. After Eboli's death, Genovese capo and Gambino ally Frank Funzi Thierry was appointed as the new front boss. In reality, the Genovese family created a new ruling panel to run the family. This second panel consisted of Catena, Lombardo, and Michel Big Mike Miranda. In 1981, Thierry became the first Cosa Nostra boss to be convicted under the new RICO Act and died in prison later that year. After Thierry's imprisonment, the family reshuffled its leadership. The capo of the Manhattan faction, Anthony Fat Tony Salerno, became the new front boss. Lombardo, the de facto boss of the family, soon retired, and Vincent Giganti, the triggerman on the failed Costello hit, took actual control of the family. In 1985, Salerno was convicted in the Mafia Commission trial and sentenced to 100 years in federal prison. In 1986, shortly after Salerno's conviction in the commission trial, Salerno's longtime right-hand man, Vincent the Fish Caffaro, turned informant, and told the FBI that Salerno had been the front boss for head Giganti. Caffaro also revealed that the Genovese family had been keeping up this ruse since 1969. After the 1980 murder of Philadelphia family boss, Angelo Gentile Don Bruno, Giganti and Lombardo began manipulating the rival factions in the war-torn Philadelphia family. Giganti and Lombardo finally gave their support to Philadelphia mobster, Nicodemo Little Nicky Scarfo, who in return gave the Genovese mobsters permission to operate in Atlantic City in 1982. Giganti built a vast network of bookmaking and loan sharking rings, and from extortions of garbage, shipping, trucking, and construction companies seeking labor, peace or contracts from carpenters, teamsters, and laborers' unions, including those at the Javits Center, as well as protection payoffs from merchants at the Fulton Fish Market. Giganti also had influence in the Feast of San Gennaro in Little Italy, operating gambling games, extorting payoffs from vendors, and pocketing thousands of dollars donated to a neighborhood church, until a crackdown in 1995 by New York City officials. During Giganti's tenure as boss of the Genovese family, after the imprisonment of John Gotti in 1992, Giganti came to be known as the figurehead capo di tutti capi, the boss of all bosses, despite the position being abolished since 1931 with the murder of Salvatore Maranzano. Giganti was reclusive, and almost impossible to capture on wiretaps, speaking softly, eschewing the phone, and even at times whistling into the receiver. He almost never left his home unoccupied because he knew FBI agents would sneak in and plant a bug. Genovese members were not allowed to mention Giganti's name in conversations or phone calls. When they had to mention him, members would point to their chins or make the letter C with their fingers. From 1978 to 1990, 4 of the 5 crime families of New York, including the Genovese family, rigged bids for 75% of $191 million, or about $142 million, of the window contracts awarded by the New York City Housing Authority. Installation companies were required to make union payoffs between $1 and $2 for each window installed. On May 30, 1990, Giganti was indicted along with other members of 4 of the New York crime families for conspiring to rig bids and extort payoffs from contractors on multi-million-dollar contracts with the Nike Housing Authority to install windows. Giganti attended his arraignment in pajamas and bathrobe, and due to his defense stating that he was mentally and physically impaired, legal battles ensued for 7 years over his competence to stand trial. In June 1993, Giganti was indicted again, charged with sanctioning the murders of 6 mobsters and conspiring to kill 3 others, including Gambino boss John Gotti. At sanity hearings in March 1996, Sammy the Bull Gravano, former underboss of the Gambino crime family, who became a cooperating witness in 1991, and Alphonse Little Al Darco, former acting boss of the Lucchese family, testified that Giganti was lucid at top-level mafia meetings and that he had told other gangsters that his eccentric behavior was a pretense. Giganti's lawyers got testimony and reports from psychiatrists that from 1969 to 1995 Giganti had been confined 28 times in hospitals for treatment of hallucinations and that he suffered from dementia rooted in organic brain damage. In August 1996, senior judge of the United States District Court for the Eastern District of New York, Eugene Nickerson, ruled that Giganti was mentally competent to stand trial. He pleaded not guilty and had been free for years on $1 million bail. Giganti had another cardiac operation in December 1996. On June 25, 1997, Giganti's trial started. Giganti stood trial in a wheelchair. On July 25, 1997, after almost 3 days of deliberations, the jury convicted Giganti of conspiring in plots to kill other mobsters, and of running rackets as head of the Genovese family. Prosecutors stated that the verdict finally established that Giganti was not mentally ill as his lawyers and relatives had long maintained. On December 18, 1997, Giganti was sentenced to 12 years in prison and fined $1.25 million by Judge Jack B. Weinstein, a lenient sentence due to Giganti's age and frailty, who declared that Giganti had been finally brought to bay in his declining years after decades of vicious criminal tyranny. While in prison, he maintained his role as boss of the Genovese family, while other mobsters were entrusted to run the day-to-day activities of the family. Giganti relayed orders to the crime family through his son, Andrew, who visited him in prison. On January 23, 2002, Giganti was indicted with several other mobsters, including his son Andrew, on obstruction of justice charges due to him causing a 7-year delay in his previous trial by feigning insanity. Several days later, Andrew was released on $2.5 million bail. On April 7, 2003, the day the trial began, prosecutor Roslyn R. Moskov had planned to play tapes showing him fully coherent, careful, and intelligent, running crime operations from prison, but when Giganti pleaded guilty to obstruction of justice, Judge I. Leo Glasser sentenced him to an additional 3 years in prison. Moskov stated, "The jig is up." Vincent Giganti was a cunning faker, and those of us in law enforcement always knew that this was an act. The act ran for decades, but today it's over. On July 25, 2003, Andrew Giganti was sentenced to 2 years in prison and fined $2.5 million for racketeering and extortion. Giganti died on December 19, 2005, at the Medical Center for Federal Prisoners in Springfield, Missouri. His funeral and burial were held 4 days later, on December 23, at St. Anthony of Padua Church in Greenwich Village, largely in anonymity. Liborio Barney Bellomo took over as boss. When Giganti died in late 2005, the leadership went to Genovese capo Daniel "Danny the Lion" Leo, who was apparently running the day-to-day activities of the Genovese crime family by 2006. That same year, Cirillo was reportedly promoted to consigliere behind bars, and Mangano was released from prison. By 2008, the Genovese family administration was believed to be whole again. In March 2008, Leo was sentenced to 5 years in prison for loan sharking and extortion. Former acting consigliere Lawrence Little Larry Dentico was leading the New Jersey faction of the family until convicted of racketeering in 2006. He was released from prison in 2009. In December 2008, Bellomo was paroled after serving 12 years. What role Bellomo plays in the Genovese hierarchy is open to speculation, but he is likely to have a major say in the running of the family once his tight parole restrictions are over. A March 2009 article in the New York Post claimed Leo was still acting boss despite his incarceration. It also estimated that the Genovese family consists of about 270 maid members. The family maintains power and influence in New York, New Jersey, Atlantic City, and Florida. It is recognized as the most powerful Cosa Nostra family in the U.S. since Giganti's reign. The family has been so strong and successful because of its continued devotion to secrecy. According to the FBI, many family associates do not know the names of family leaders or even other associates. This information lockdown makes gaining incriminating information from government informants more difficult for the FBI. In 2016, Eugene Rooster Onofrio, who is believed to be a capo, largely active in Little Italy and Connecticut, was accused of operating a large multi-million-dollar enterprise that ran bookmaking offices, scammed medical businesses, smuggled cigarettes, and guns. He was also alleged to have run a loan shark operation from Florida to Massachusetts. Other members of his reputed crew pleaded guilty to extortion and other crimes. Gerald Danielle, an associate, was sentenced to 2 years in prison in March 2018. On April 10, 2018, Ralph Santaniello, suspected of being a Genovese acting capo, was sentenced to 5 years in prison for extorting $20,000 from Craig Morrell, the owner of one of the biggest towing and scrap metal companies in western Massachusetts, including threatening his life and assaulting him. Morrell managed to negotiate the extortion price from $100,000 to $20,000. Associate Giovanni Johnny Calabrese was sentenced to 3 years in prison. In October 2017, 13 Genovese and Gambino soldiers and associates were sentenced after being indicted, following a nipped operation in December 2016. Dubbed Sharkbait, the investigation was based on the involvement of a large illegal gambling and loan sharking ring. Prosecutors claimed 76-year-old Genovese soldier Salvatore Di Mio was in charge of the criminal operation and had generated several $1 million from the enterprise. Soldier Alex Canigliaro was sentenced to 4 months in jail and 4 months house arrest in late October 2017, with a fine of $5,000, after admitting that he supervised and financed a $14,000 per week illegal bookmaking and sports betting operation between 2011 and 2014. Genovese associates Gennaro Geritano and Mario Lenardi were allegedly partners in selling untaxed cigarettes in New York, alleged to have sold over 30,000 packs. According to the FBI, the Genovese family has not had an official boss since Giganti's death. Law enforcement considers Leo to be the acting boss, Mangano the underboss, and Cirillo the consigliere. The family is known for placing top capos in leadership positions to help the administration run day-to-day activities. At present, Capos Bellomo, Muscarella, Cirillo, and Dentico hold the greatest influence within the family and play major roles in its administration. The Manhattan and Bronx factions, the traditional powers in the family, still exercise that control today. On January 10, 2018, 5 members and associates, including the son of former boss Vincent Giganti, Vincent Esposito, were arrested and charged with racketeering, conspiracy, and several counts of related offenses by the NIP and FBI. The charges include extortion, labor racketeering, conspiracy, fraud and bribery. Genovese associate and Brooklyn-based United Food and Commercial Workers officer Frank Cognetta was also charged. Union official and associate Vincent D'Aconto Jr. was also involved and allegedly acted on behalf of Esposito to pass along threat messages, and to also collect extortion money from the union, in particular from Vincent Fife, the president of a wine, liquor and distillery union in Brooklyn. Fife was forced to pay $10,000 per year for him to keep his $300,000 a year union job, which he achieved through the influence of the Genovese crime family. The labor union infiltration was alleged to have taken place for at least 16 years. Esposito allegedly extorted several other union officials and an insurance agent. At his home during a warranted search, authorities recovered an unregistered handgun, $3.8 million in cash, brass knuckle dusters, and a handwritten list of American Mafia members. Esposito was granted bail for almost $10 million in April 2018, and pleaded not guilty. In April 2019, Esposito pled guilty to conspiring to commit racketeering offenses with members and associates of the Genovese crime family of La Cosa Nostra. He was sentenced in July 2019 to 2 years in prison.